Her family sold her to the ruthless Alpha King, only to discover he loved her more than anyone ever had. The morning her life changed, Nadia Cole was standing in the kitchen making tea she would never drink. She heard the voices before she understood them. Her father, Gerald, was speaking in a low and careful tone, the kind he only used when he was hiding something. Her older brother, Owen, was agreeing with short, clipped words. Nadia pressed herself against the wall of the hallway and listened, and with every sentence, the floor beneath her felt less solid. They had sold her. Not in those words, of course. Her father used phrases like arranged union and financial agreement and long-term security. But the meaning was the same. Nadia Cole, 22 years old, the middle daughter of a ruined man, was to be handed over to Darian Vane, the most powerful and feared man in the entire northern region, in exchange for the complete erasure of her father's debts. She did not scream. She did not run. She walked back to the kitchen, turned off the kettle, and sat down at the table. Her hands were completely still. That stillness frightened her more than anything else. Gerald Cole had always been a man who believed his next deal would save him. When Nadia was 8, he had pulled the family out of their comfortable home in the city and moved them to a smaller town, chasing an investment that collapsed within 6 months. When she was 12, he borrowed from a man no one spoke about openly, and the family spent 3 years paying it back in silence and fear. When she was 17, he lost the last of her late grandmother's savings on a business that never opened its doors. Nadia had watched all of it. She had watched her mother, Clara, fold herself smaller with every disaster, smiling at neighbors and pretending nothing was wrong. She had watched Owen become her father's shadow, loyal not out of love but out of shared interest. And she had watched her younger sister, Lily, be shielded from every truth because she was the pretty one, the soft one, the one the family had decided mattered more. Nadia had never been anyone's first choice. She had understood that from a young age. But this was something she had not prepared herself for. Gerald walked into the kitchen 20 minutes later and found her sitting exactly where she had been. He stopped when he saw her face. He had the look of a man who had rehearsed a speech and suddenly forgotten every word of it. "You heard," he said. "I heard," she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. He was 61 but looked older, his face marked by years of poor decisions and the weight of pretending they hadn't happened. He folded his hands on the table and looked at them. "Nadia, I want you to understand that this was not something I wanted." She looked at him for a long moment. "But it is something you chose." He did not answer that. Instead, he explained. The debt was enormous, far larger than anything he had faced before. The creditor this time was not a patient man. Gerald had gone to Darian Vane's office 6 weeks ago, hoping to negotiate some kind of deal, a payment plan, something. Darian had listened. And then Darian had made a counteroffer that Gerald had not expected. He wanted a wife. Not just any arrangement. A real marriage, legally binding. Darian Vane was 36 years old and had spent his entire adult life building an empire from nothing. He had land, money, and more influence than most governments. What he did not have, for reasons no one in town fully understood, was a family. Those who worked for him said he had never once brought a woman to his home. Those who knew him from a distance said he was cold in a way that went past personality, that something in him had simply switched off a long time ago. Gerald had looked at his middle daughter, the quiet one, the one who asked nothing of anyone, and he had said yes. Nadia sat with this information for a long time. Then she asked one question. "Did you consider saying no?" Gerald was quiet for so long that the silence became its own answer. She got up from the table. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at the small collection of things that made up her life, the books she had read twice, the photographs on the windowsill, the journal she had been writing in since she was 15. She thought about her future, the one she had been quietly building in her mind. She had been saving money from her job at the local library. She had been looking into a writing program at a university 2 towns over. She had plans. Careful, hopeful, small plans. She opened her journal and wrote one sentence. "They chose the death over me." Then she closed it, stood up, and began to pack. Her mother came to her room that evening. Clara sat beside her on the bed and took her hand, and Nadia waited for words of comfort, for some indication that her mother was going to fight for her. Instead, Clara said, "He is very wealthy. You will be comfortable." Nadia removed her hand gently. "That is not the same as being happy." Clara looked at the wall. "Sometimes comfortable is the best we can hope for." Nadia did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and thought about every version of her future and realized that not one of them had included a choice made by her own family to send her away. She had survived her father's failures. She had survived being the overlooked one. She had survived being passed over for Lily's dance recitals and Owen's university fees while her own ambitions sat quietly in the corner. She had not expected to be sold. The car came the next morning. It was a black vehicle, clean and silent, with a driver who wore a dark jacket and said nothing beyond a polite greeting. Nadia stood at the front door with a single bag. Her father stood behind her. Owen was not there. Her mother stood to the side, holding a handkerchief she was not using. Lily came running down the stairs at the last moment and grabbed Nadia's arm. "You don't have to go," Lily whispered. "Someone has to," Nadia said. And she kissed her sister's forehead, picked up her bag, and walked to the car. She did not look back. The drive took 2 hours. They left the small town and moved along winding roads that climbed steadily upward, through stretches of dense forest and open highland, until the land opened into a wide coastal view and the estate appeared on a cliff above the sea. It was large and stone-built, the kind of structure that looked like it had been standing for centuries, not a home designed to impress but one that had simply outlasted everything around it. Nadia pressed her palm flat against the cool glass of the car window and looked at it. She thought about her journal entry. She thought about the writing program. She thought about the small savings account that still had her name on it and could not be touched by anyone else. Then she straightened her spine, folded her hands in her lap, and decided one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever happened inside those walls, she was not going to disappear. She had spent 22 years being invisible to the people who were supposed to love her. She was not going to let a stranger take what little she had left of herself. The car stopped. The door opened. The wind from the sea hit her face immediately, sharp and cold and completely real. She stepped out. She looked up at the house. And somewhere inside it, a door opened. She had expected someone frightening. She had not expected someone so completely still. Darian Vane was standing at the top of the stone steps when the car arrived, and Nadia saw him clearly before he saw her. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the build of a man who had worked physically for most of his life, broad through the shoulders and standing with the particular stillness of someone who had no need to prove anything to anyone. His hair was dark, his jaw sharp, and his expression was the blunkiest thing Nadia had ever seen on a human face. Not cruel. Not cold, exactly. Just completely, carefully closed. He was wearing a dark shirt and dark trousers, nothing formal, as though he had not thought very much about meeting her. As though this were simply a Tuesday. As though a woman had not just been handed to him like a transaction. Maybe, for him, that was exactly what it was. Nadia climbed the steps with her bag in her hand and stopped 2 steps below him so that they were nearly level. She looked at him directly. She had promised herself she would not look at her feet. He studied her for a moment. His eyes were a dark grey-green, the color of the sea below the cliffs on an overcast day. "Nadia Cole," he said. His voice was low and even. "That's right," she said. "You'll be Nadia Vane by the end of the week." She held his gaze. "I know the terms." Something shifted almost invisibly in his expression. If she had blinked, she would have missed it. It was not warmth. It was more like the faintest flicker of recalibration, as though she had not said what he expected. "Come inside," he said. He turned and walked through the door without holding it for her. She caught it with her hand before it closed and followed him in. The interior of the house was vast and quietly extraordinary. High ceilings, stone floors covered with worn rugs, walls lined with shelves that held books and not much else. Large windows faced the sea on one side and the hillside on the other, letting in grey light that moved with the clouds. The furniture was expensive but not showy, the kind of things chosen for use, not display. Everything was clean and ordered, but it did not feel like a home. It felt like a place someone very disciplined lived in, without much thought given to joy. She followed Darian through a wide corridor and up a staircase to the second floor, where he stopped outside a closed door. "Your room," he said. "You have your own bathroom. Meals are served at 7 in the morning and 7 in the evening, but the kitchen is available whenever you need it. The staff will show you anything you need to find." He paused. "The east wing is private. You are not to go there." Nadia looked at the closed door he had just indicated, then back at him. "Is that where you keep things you don't want anyone to see?" The pause that followed was very brief. "It is where I keep my work." "I see. Do you have questions?" She had about 40 questions. She chose one. "Are you going to speak to me like this always? Like I am someone you are briefing at the start of a business arrangement?" Darian looked at her. His expression did not change, but there was something behind his eyes that she could not name. "That is what this is," he said. "I know what it is," Nadia said. "I am asking what you intend it to feel like." He had no answer for that. Or if he did, he chose not to give it. He simply said, "Dinner is at 7, and walked back down the corridor, and she was left standing at the door of a room that smelled of clean linen and sea air and absolutely nothing familiar. She opened the door and walked in. The room was large and quiet. A window faced directly out to the sea. There was a desk in the corner, which she had not expected and which she was immediately grateful for. The bed was wide and covered in layers of dark blue and grey, and on the bedside table, there was a small lamp and she stopped. There was a book on the bedside table. She walked over and picked it up. It was a novel by an author she had mentioned to Owen 6 months ago, in a passing conversation about what she wished she had time to read. She had not said it loudly or importantly. She had simply mentioned it in the way people mention things they do not expect anyone to remember. She turned the book over in her hands. She looked at the door. Then at the book. Then at the door again. She sat down on the edge of the bed and opened the first page. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself a man like Darian Vane had staff who researched things, who arranged things. It was a detail, nothing more. An efficient gesture, not a thoughtful one. She told herself this clearly and firmly. Then she began to read. The week that followed was strangely quiet. The legal process of the marriage was handled quickly and with very little ceremony, documents signed in the presence of a solicitor and 2 witnesses on a grey Wednesday morning. Nadia signed her name carefully, in full, and did not let her hand tremble. Darian sat across the table from her and signed his name without looking up. That evening, they ate dinner on opposite ends of a long table. The food was excellent. No one spoke. Nadia looked out the window at the sea and thought about the writing program again. She thought about whether the application deadline had passed. She thought about whether she could still apply, whether she could study from here, whether any of the plans she had made for herself were still reachable. She decided they were. She decided she would find a way. After dinner, she went to the kitchen and asked the head of the household staff, a calm, competent woman named Vera, whether there was a study area she could use that was not her bedroom. Vera looked at her with an expression that could not quite be read. Then she said, "Mr. Vane has a library on the ground floor, to the left of the main hall. He is not often in it in the evenings." "Thank you," Nadia said. She found the library. It was the most alive room in the house, every wall covered in shelves, a reading chair near the fireplace, a white table in the center with good light. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books and felt, for the first time since arriving, something she recognized. She sat down at the table, took out the notebook she had packed with her belongings, and began to write. She did not hear the door open behind her 40 minutes later. She did not hear footsteps. She only became aware that someone was there when the fireplace was suddenly lit, and she turned quickly and found Darian standing near it, a long match in his hand, watching her with that same unreadable expression. "I didn't hear you come in," she said. "You were writing," he said. "Does it bother you?" "I can go." "You can stay." He set the match down and turned as if to leave. "What do you do," she said, "in the evenings? When you're not working?" He stopped. A long pause. "I don't sleep well," he said finally, as though the words had cost him something. "I work. I read. Sometimes I work until morning." "That sounds lonely," she said. He looked at her over his shoulder. "It is efficient." "That is not what I said." He turned back to the door. "Good night, Nadia." "Good night, Darian." He left. The fire he had lit continued to burn, and Nadia sat in its warmth for another hour, writing, listening to the sound of the sea outside, thinking about loneliness and efficiency and the careful, practiced way a man could make one sound exactly like the other. The fever came on a Thursday. Nadia had spent the morning in the library, the afternoon walking the cliff path behind the estate, something she had started doing every day, needing to feel the cold air and the open sky, and by evening she could barely keep her eyes open. She told herself she was tired. She ate only half her dinner and went upstairs early, and by midnight she was shaking so hard the covers could not warm her. She did not call anyone. She did not know how, exactly, in a house this large and quiet, you were meant to call for help. She found a glass of water on the bedside table and drank it slowly. She pulled every blanket she could find over herself. She told herself it would pass by morning. It did not pass by morning. By the next day, she was barely able to sit up. The wall tilted whenever she moved her head, and the light from the window felt like something sharp. She heard the door of her room open at some point and had a hazy understanding that it was Vera, who pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and said something in a low voice. Then Vera left, and there was silence, and then a different kind of presence entered the room. She did not need to open her eyes to know it was Darian. She knew it by the way the room changed, the particular stillness that followed him wherever he went, that quality of absolute control in every small movement. She heard a chair pulled close to the bed. She opened her eyes with some effort. He was sitting in it, his arms resting on his knees, looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not blank. Not closed. Something that was very carefully trying to look calm but was not entirely managing it. "You should have told someone," he said. "I didn't want to be a problem," she said. Her voice came out hoarse and thin. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You are not a problem. You are saying that because I am your legal responsibility now." He did not answer that immediately. He reached forward and pressed the back of his hand to her forehead, and the coolness of it was such immediate relief that she closed her eyes without meaning to. "A doctor is coming in the morning," he said. "Until then, you are going to drink water and rest." "You don't have to stay," she said. "I know," he said. He stayed. He was there when she woke in the small hours of the night, burning and confused. He placed a cool cloth on her forehead and told her in a very quiet voice to breathe slowly, that she was fine, that it was just a fever and fever's end. He said it without force, without drama, in the same even tone he used for everything, and it was that very evenness that steadied her, the sense that he was not frightened for her, and so maybe she did not need to be frightened either. He read to her. She did not ask him to. She woke at some point in the grey early morning to the sound of his voice, low and steady, reading from the novel she had left on her bedside table, the one she had found on her first day, and she lay very still and listened without telling him she was awake. His voice was different when he read. Less guarded. The words moved through it differently, as though reading was one of the few things he did without watching himself do it. She fell back asleep to the sound of it. The doctor came the next morning, confirmed it was a viral fever, gave instructions, and left. Vera managed everything with her usual efficiency. Nadia slept most of that day and woke in the late afternoon to find a cup of warm broth on the bedside table, still hot, and the chair beside the bed empty. She drank the broth slowly. Then she picked up the novel and found the page where Darian had stopped reading the night before. She continued from there. By the third day, the fever had broken. She was weak but clear-headed, and she sat up in bed with her notebook and wrote while the afternoon light stretched across the floor. Darian came to the doorway at 6 and looked in. "You're better," he said. "Much better. Thank you." She paused. "You didn't have to do that. Sit with me." "Any of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she had not expected. "No one sat with me," he said. "When I was ill, as a child. There was never anyone." He said it without self-pity, the way people state very old facts they have long since stopped being surprised by. "I did not think it was something that should be repeated." Nadia looked at him. Not with pity, she had been right about that instinct, she could tell he would not receive pity well. But with the particular recognition of someone who understood what it meant to be the person no one showed up for. "Your father," she asked carefully. The briefest pause. "He was not a man who believed in softness." She nodded slowly. "Mine believed that providing money, when he had it, was the same as providing love." He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved from the doorway and sat in the chair beside the bed, not as close as he had been during the fever, but present. "Real. Not living." "Tell me about him," he said. Not an order. Not quite a question either. Something in between, an opening, tentative and slightly unpracticed, from a man who did not often create openings. Nadia set her notebook down. She pulled the blanket up around her shoulders and looked at the window, at the last of the afternoon light dying over the sea. And she told him. Not everything. Not yet. But enough, the moving around, the debts, the way her mother had learned to make small means safe, the way Lily had been protected while Nadia had been left to understand the world too early and without enough warning. She talked for a long time. Darian listened without interrupting, without offering anything back. Just listened, with the particular quality of attention of someone who had spent most of their life listening to nothing but their own thoughts. When she finished, the room was almost fully dark. Neither of them had moved to turn on the light. "You are angry with them," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "And yet you left without a sin." "Anger doesn't always look like a sin," she said. "Sometimes it looks like deciding you are worth more than the situation you've been put in." He was quiet for a long time. "I built this house," he said then, slowly, "to be somewhere no one could reach me. I thought that if I made myself large enough, powerful enough, nothing could touch me again. That I would be beyond it all." He paused. "I did not consider that being beyond everything also meant being beyond anything worth having." Nadia turned her head to look at him. In the near dark, his face was less guarded than she had ever seen it. "What happened to you?" she asked. "Before all of this." The silence that followed was so long she thought he would not answer. "Another time," he said quietly. "All right," she said. He stood. He moved to the door. Then he stopped and looked back at her. "You should eat a full meal tomorrow," he said. "Vera will make something." "I will," Nadia said. "Good." He paused. "I am glad you are better." She watched him leave. She sat in the dark for a little while. Then she turned on the lamp, picked up her notebook, and wrote for 2 hours straight, pouring everything she had seen and heard and felt into pages that were already running out of space. The phone call came on a morning in early March, 3 weeks after Nadia had recovered from the fever. She was in the library when Vera found her, expression carefully neutral in the way Vera's face always became when something had happened that she was not sure how to deliver. She told Nadia quietly that there was a man at the front gate asking for her. That he said he was her brother. Nadia closed her notebook. "Send him to the sitting room," she said. "I will be there in a moment." Owen Cole looked exactly as he always had, smooth-haired, well-dressed in an inexpensive way that tried to look expensive, his smile the kind that arrived before his sincerity did. He was standing when she walked in, hands in his pockets, looking around the room with the unconcealed interest of a man calculating the value of things. "Nadia," he said warmly, as though they had parted on perfectly good terms. "Owen," she said. She did not sit down and she did not invite him to. He shifted, smile undimmed. You look well. The place agrees with you. What are you here for? He paused, then moved into it smoothly. Their father, it seemed, had encountered new difficulties. Not the old debts, those were cleared, as agreed. New ones. And the family had thought, reasonably, Owen said, that given Nadia's position now, her connection to a man of Darian's resources, perhaps she could simply speak to him. On their behalf. Just a conversation. Just a word in the right ear. Nadia listened to all of this without expression. You came to ask me to use my marriage to clean up another one of father's mistakes, she said. Owen spread his hands. We are family. You were quiet when I was put in a car and sent away, she said. I did not hear your voice that morning. He had the grace to look briefly uncomfortable. That was complicated. It was not complicated, she said. You made a choice. You chose not to speak. And now you are here because you need something. She paused. I would like you to leave, Owen. He dropped the warm then, and something harder came through it, the look of a man who had expected easier. Nadia, be reasonable. He has money he would not even notice spending. You could ask him and it would cost you nothing. It would cost me exactly everything, she said. He opened his mouth to speak again and then stopped, because the door behind Nadia had opened. She did not need to turn around. She knew by Owen's expression that it was Darian. Darian walked past her, not between her and Owen, but to the side, standing slightly apart, not crowding her, not taking over. His expression was its familiar stone calm. You are the brother, he said. I am, Owen said, pulling the smile back out. You have made a request of my wife? Not a question. Owen glanced at Nadia. A family matter. Nothing more. Your family, Darian said, made an arrangement that I honored in full. The terms were clear. There are no further obligations. With respect, Owen started. I am not offering respect as an invitation to continue, Darian said. His voice had not risen. It had not needed to. It had simply become the kind of quiet that stopped things. Nadia asked you to leave. I am asking you to leave. The next step will involve my legal team, and I would prefer not to go to that step before noon. Owen Cole looked at his sister once more. She looked back at him without flinching. He nodded, once, and walked out. The front door closed. The sound of a car engine faded down the driveway. Nadia let out a breath so slow and steady she barely moved. You were listening, she said. I was in the hall, Darian said. Vera told me someone had come. I was going to wait outside, but then I heard enough to understand what was happening. He paused. I should have waited for you to ask for help. She turned and looked at him. You stepped in at the right moment, she said. Not too early. Something in his face shifted. Are you all right? She considered the question honestly. I expected it, she said. I think part of me has been waiting for it since I arrived. Waiting for them to find a way to reach through whatever wall this place provides and pull something out of me again. She looked down at her hands. It is strange to realize that for the first time in my life, someone pushed back on my behalf. He was quiet. Then he said, it was not a large effort. It was to me, she said. He did not seem to know what to do with that. He looked at the window, at the gray sky beyond it, and she watched his face and thought about what he had told her during the fever, the illness and the empty chair and the father who did not believe in softness. She thought about what it looked like when someone had never been fought for either, and how they might not even recognize it when they finally were. Darian, she said. He looked at her. Thank you. He nodded once, short and real, and she believed it. 3 days after Owen left, a woman named Celeste arrived in town. Nadia heard about it first through Vera, who mentioned it with the same controlled neutrality she applied to all delicate information. Celeste had been, it was understood by those who had known Darian before the estate, someone important to him once. Years ago. Before the empire. Before all of it. And now she had given an interview to a regional publication in which she spoke warmly and at considerable length about Darian, their closeness, the time they had shared, the unique way she understood him. She said, carefully and with a smile caught in the photograph beside the article, that she and Darian had never really ended things so much as paused them. Nadia read this in the library on a rainy afternoon. She read it twice. Then she folded the publication and set it on the table and looked at the sea through the window for a long time. She examined what she felt. She was honest with herself, she had always been that, at least. And what she felt was not rage. It was not devastation. It was a quieter and more complicated thing, the kind that happens when you realize you have started to care about something without quite noticing when it began. She had started to care. She did not know exactly when. Perhaps during the fever, and his steady hands and his voice reading in the dark. Perhaps the evening she had told him about her father and he had simply listened. Perhaps it had been earlier than that, the book on the bedside table, the library fire, the way he said goodnight as though the word cost him something and he was paying it willingly. She did not know when it had started. She only knew, sitting in the library with the rain against the glass, that it had. That evening, Darian came to dinner and sat at his end of the table and was precisely as he always was. If he knew about the article, and she was sure he did, he showed nothing. She decided she would not raise it. Not yet. But she watched him across the table, this closed and complicated man who had lit fires for her and read to her in the dark and sent her brother away without raising his voice, and she thought, I need to know the truth. Not from an article. From him. She waited until dinner was finished and the table had been cleared, and she said, Darian. He looked up. I need to ask you something. He set down his glass. Ask. The woman in the article. Celeste. She held his gaze. Is there something between you that I should know about? The pause was exactly 1 second. No, he said. She implies otherwise. She implies many things, he said. She has always found implication useful. He picked up his glass again. There was a time, a long time ago, when I thought I knew what she was. I was wrong. When I understood my mistake, I ended things. She chose to interpret that as something temporary. He looked at Nadia directly. It is not temporary. It has never been temporary. I am not a man who changes his mind about people once he has understood them fully. Nadia held his gaze for a moment. And what do you understand about me, so far? The question surprised him. She could see it in the very small change around his eyes. More than you might expect, he said quietly. She nodded slowly. She believed him. That night, she wrote in her notebook for 3 hours and filled the last of its pages. In the morning, she would ask Vera for another one. She had more to say than she had expected. She had more than she had planned for. She was starting to think that this house, cold and stone and siege as it was, might have more room in it than she had first understood. Spring came quietly to the estate, the way all things seemed to come to that place, without announcement, without ceremony. 1 week the cliff path was grey and bare, and the next, small flowers appeared along the edges of it, pale yellow against the stone. Nadia walked it every day without fail, and by April she had learned every bend in it, every place where the wind came strongest, every spot where you could stand and see the sea in 3 directions at once. She also walked with Darian, though neither of them had ever formally decided to. It had simply started happening. He would be at the top of the steps when she came outside, or she would find him already on the path, and they would walk together, and the silence between them had changed so gradually that she had not noticed until she looked back at how it used to feel. At the beginning, the silence had been a war. Now it was simply air, the comfortable kind, the kind you breathe without thinking about. He told her things on those walks. Not all at once, not in one long unburdening, but in pieces, the way very old things get revealed, a fragment here, a detail there, until gradually a picture formed. His father had been a man of sudden and unpredictable angers. His mother had left when Darian was 7, and he had grown up understanding that the safest thing a person could be was useful, not loved, not wanted, just useful. He had worked every job available to him from the age of 14. He had built his first business with money saved from 3 years of work that paid almost nothing. He had been patient in a way that most people found unsettling, because his patience did not come from peace. It came from the understanding that if he waited long enough and worked hard enough, no one would ever have power over him again. And did it work? Nadia asked, one afternoon in early May, the sea wind pulling at her hair. In all the ways that could be measured, he said. And in the ways that couldn't be. He was quiet for a moment. I had everything I had decided I needed. I had not decided I needed anything I didn't have. That is a very specific kind of emptiness. She looked at him. He was looking at the horizon. His profile against the sky was sharp and certain, the face of someone who had spent decades being exactly sure of himself, and yet she had learned to see the small things now. The way his shoulders were slightly less squared than they used to be. The way he sometimes stopped himself from leaving a room the way he once would have, choosing to stay instead. When you made the arrangement with my father, she said, choosing the words carefully, what were you actually hoping for? He turned to look at her. Order, he said. Someone in the house. A presence. I had been told, by people whose judgment I respected, that what I needed was something stable beside me, a partnership, in the formal sense. Not warmth. I did not believe I was still capable of warmth. And now, she asked. The sea moved below them. A bird crossed the horizon. Now, he said, I am beginning to think I was wrong about that. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the sea and breathed and felt something in her chest that was not grief and not fear and not the careful holding back she had practiced her whole life. It was something else entirely. Something she had almost forgotten the shape of. Hope. The change between them happened the way real things change, not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small ones. It was the evening she stayed up late reading in the library and he brought her tea without being asked, setting it on the table beside her and then sitting across from her and reading his own book until midnight. It was the Saturday she found him in the kitchen, not a place he usually appeared, attempting to fix something in the back of a drawer, and she sat on the counter and watched him work and they talked for 2 hours about nothing consequential and she laughed more than she had in months. It was the morning she cried, quietly, privately, she thought, at her desk, over something her mother had said in a letter that was not unkind but was precisely wrong, and he appeared in the doorway, and he did not ask questions or offer solutions. He simply came and sat beside her and stayed until she was finished. He was not demonstrative. He was not the kind of man who spoke easily about what he felt. But she had learned his language, the one that existed in the things he did rather than what he said. And in that language, he had been telling her something for weeks. The moment she named it to herself came on a Tuesday evening in late May. She had been working on the university application, she had found the course, she had written the letter, she had made the decision to do it regardless of geography, regardless of anything. She was going to apply. She was going to build the life she had planned for herself inside this life too, and she was not going to ask permission. She told Darian at dinner. She laid out the application, the course, the plan. She told him she would need to study, that it would take time, that she was not asking him to do anything but wanted him to know. She was organized and direct and braced for a version of how her father always received her plans, the slight impatience, the gentle dismissal disguised as practicality. Darian looked at the papers. He looked at her. You should have started sooner, he said. She blinked. What? You should have applied last autumn. You have lost a term. He looked back at the papers. You will have to write a strong letter to explain the delay. I can connect you with someone at the university, not to influence the decision, but to make sure the administrative process is not unnecessarily complicated. She stared at him. Is that not what you wanted? He said. I was preparing myself, she said slowly, for you to be difficult about it. He looked at her with something that was not quite confusion but was close to it. Why would I be difficult about it? My family always was. The silence stretched. He looked down at the table for a moment. Then he said, quietly, Nadia. What I actually want, is for you to have everything that belongs to you. Everything you planned for yourself. I am not your father. I am not trying to make you small. She felt the words land somewhere deep. Somewhere that had been braced against words like them for a long time. I know, she said. And she did. She sent the application the following morning. The reply came in 3 weeks, and when she opened the letter at the kitchen table and read that she had been accepted, she sat very still for one long moment and then made a sound she had not made in a very long time. Something uncomplicated and bright, the sound of someone who had been given something back that they had thought was gone. Darian was in the doorway within seconds. She held up the letter. He crossed the room and read it and then did something she had not seen him do once in all the months she had known him. He smiled. Not the polite, controlled expression she had occasionally seen him offer others. A real one, small and sudden and completely unguarded, the smile of someone who had not quite planned to feel what they were feeling. Congratulations, he said. His voice was slightly different. Lower. She stood up from the table and without planning it at all she stepped forward and put her arms around him. She felt him go very still, not tense, just still, the way a person goes still when something happens they were not prepared for and are not certain how to hold. And then, carefully, as though learning the shape of it, his arms came around her too. They stood like that for a moment. Just a moment. Then she stepped back and he let her go, and they looked at each other in the bright kitchen with the morning light coming through the windows, and everything that had been slowly building between them was there in the room without either of them having to say a word. She did not need him to rescue her. She had never needed that. But she had needed to be seen. To be chosen not out of transaction or convenience or the managed removal of loneliness, but out of something real, the particular, quiet, daily choosing of a person who sees who you are and decides that is more than enough. She had spent 22 years in a family that looked through her. She had not expected to find, in a house on a cliff above the sea, a man who looked directly at her, and kept looking. That evening, they ate dinner at the same end of the table. It had started happening sometime in March, without being decided. The long stretch of former distance between them had simply reduced, naturally, because neither of them had needed it anymore. After dinner, he asked if she wanted to walk. She said yes. They went out to the cliff path in the early evening, the sky pale and clear above the sea, the last of the sun stretched long and golden across the water. They walked at the same pace, close but not touching, and the silence around them was the good kind, the kind that needs nothing added to it. At the furthest point of the path, where you could see farthest and the wind was strongest, they stopped. Nadia looked out at the sea and thought about the girl who had been put in a black car with a single bag and driven away by a family that had chosen its own comfort over her. She thought about how small that girl had felt. How invisible. How certain she had been, in the deepest and most honest part of herself, that this was simply what she was worth. She was not that girl anymore. She turned and looked at Darian. He was already looking at her. He was always looking at her now, in that way she had learned to read, steady and honest and entirely without the careful blankness he showed the rest of the world. I want to tell you something, she said. Tell me, he said. I came here prepared to survive this, she said. I made a plan. I decided I was going to hold on to myself regardless of what happened. I was not going to let this place or this situation or you take anything from me that I had left. He listened without moving. And then, she said, something happened that I was not prepared for. Because instead of taking from me, you gave things back. She paused. Things I had given up on. Things I had decided I was not allowed to want. The wind moved between them. The sea spread wide and endless below. Nadia, he said. His voice was very low. I know you did not plan for this either, she said. I know this was supposed to be a transaction. I know you are not a man who uses words like love without being certain of them. And I am not asking you to. I am only telling you the truth, because I spent a long time living in a house where the truth was the one thing no one wanted to say out loud. He took a step toward her. I planned for order, he said. I planned for a house that was less empty. I did not plan for you. He stopped very close. I did not plan for someone who would not flinch from me. Who would sit in my library and write until midnight and ask me uncomfortable questions and cry at her desk and apply to university behind my back. The smallest curve appeared at the corner of his mouth. I did not plan for any of it. And, she said. And, he said quietly, I would not trade it. She looked up at him. The sea moved. The sky above them was turning the deep, soft blue of very late evening. Neither would I, she said. He reached out and took her hand, carefully, as though learning the shape of it. She let him. She held his hand back with the same steadiness she had decided to carry through everything, and it felt nothing like a transaction. It felt like the first real thing. She had been sold by the people who were meant to protect her. She had been handed to a stranger by a father who valued debt clearance more than his own daughter. She had arrived at a stone house on a cliff above the sea with one bag and a journal and the absolute quiet decision that she would not disappear. She had not disappeared. She had been found. Not because she had been rescued, she wanted to be clear about that, even in the privacy of her own understanding. She had not needed saving. She had needed what every person needs, and so rarely gets, to be truly and fully seen by another human being. To have someone look at who she was, the quiet part and the determined part and the parts that had been hurt and had healed unevenly, and choose her. Deliberately. Daily. Darian Vane, the man her family had thought they were using as a solution to their own problems, had done that. He had looked at her. And he had not looked away. They stood on the cliff path until the last of the light left the sky and the stars appeared over the sea, quiet and without hurry, two people who had each spent too long being alone discovering that the thing they had stopped believing in had simply been waiting in an unlikely place. She had come to this house as a transaction. She was leaving her old self behind entirely. Not because her life had been given back to her, but because she had taken it back herself, piece by piece, in a library and on a cliff path and across a long table, and in doing so she had built something she had never quite had before. A life that was entirely, and only, hers. And at the center of it, chosen and real and completely unplanned, was the quiet presence of a man who had learned, alongside her, that the most powerful thing either of them had ever done was simply remain. She looked at the stars. She breathed the sea air. She held his hand. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Nadia Cole, Nadia Vane, felt exactly, completely, and without question, at home.